Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Pyrography podcast. This particular episode, I'm going to break down how I sand the wood I use. So once I've chosen the design, printed out the design, measured it and cut the wood, obviously you've got to sand it. You can, or I have found in the past, there are woods that, or you can use the wood unsanded. It just makes the sort of top layer nice and smooth and sort of as easy as possible, no matter how sort of dense the wood is or how soft the wood is. I'm really hoping this syncs up because I've got footage of me sanding wood and I just wanted to break it down. It is sped up a bit. Right, so as you can see here, I've recently started sanding the edges down. Have I got a bit? Yes, I have. I'm going to use the three-hearted as an example. Don't know if you can see. You can, just about. I've started sanding like the edges and the corners. So like round them off as best I can. I don't know why I said it like that. Best I can. Just so there's no points, I guess. It just looks nicer and feels nicer. So using 40 grit to literally sand the edges down. You won't see in this video because with the slab of beech I have, when I bought it, I decided instead of cutting it and sanding it to 600 to 3000 grit every time, I would just get the whole sheet and just go over it and spend like a couple hours just so that I could just cut the bits off I needed, sort the edges and get started. Just sort of save time in the future. I do change the angle of where I'm sat a few times just so it looks a bit better. But yeah, using 40 grit is the best way to get as much off as possible. Obviously, you want to be as careful as possible. Lowest grits, obviously, it takes off a lot with each stroke. I do spend quite a lot of time with the 40 grit. So I use, not necessarily homemade, but, well, this one is actually. So I use like a chunk of, actually, I'll go back. There you go. You can see there. I use like a chunk of wood and I wrap the 40 grit round it just so that you've got a flat surface on the sandpaper so that you've got a bit more control than obviously doing it by hand, like with your hand. And also when you're doing it by hand with your hand can curve round because it's not a like solid surface and your fingers might bend round, which can be helpful for obviously rounding the edges off, but I find it doing that with the higher grits, so yeah, 600 plus up to, I got to 3000 sometimes for some reason, but most pieces will be about 800, 1000 depending on sort of the grain of the wood and the way the colour sort of is affected by sanding, because sometimes woods can be sanded to the point where they start getting a bit lighter. But so yeah, you can see here I've got the big block, and then there we go. You can see that I use. So that is, as you can see here, it's literally just small block of wood that I got from the offcut box from my sawmill, 50p. And I literally got the 40 grit and just sanded the edges off on the bottom, so you've got a rounded edge, so that almost like curl it round the wood when you're sanding to sort of create a rounded off effect. And then on the bottom I've kept it flat, so you've got the sharp edges so that it's like a proper block. Because sometimes with smaller bits you don't want to be using the big block and going over it, because obviously the grain goes that way rather than that way, so you want something a bit smaller for the smaller pieces. But if I've got a big bit, I'll just use the big block and then just go over the whole thing primarily with the big block. But yeah, that is pretty much it with sanding the edges. For sanding. But yeah, with the big block, it doesn't matter if you don't have a small block or if you have a big block, or the size of the block doesn't 100% matter. It's just more comfort and convenience. But when I sand the wood down, obviously I didn't with this particular video, but with every piece, start with 40 corner edges, round them off, just sort of go over every single edge. I'd leave the back at 120 because just a bit, it's sort of a waste of energy really sanding it down to 3000 grit, because 120 is really quite smooth, but obviously I go to 600 plus because it just makes it that much easier just sort of going over that top layer. Granted, some woods, yes, you burn a bit deeper, but just that initial start of burn just makes it easier to get into the burn, especially if you've got a mindset like me where if it starts to go wrong and then gets a bit worse and worse, give up pretty quickly. So as long as I can get the burn started, get in the right mindset, we're grand. I use a 40 grit to get the edges done, get the top done, and the sides, and the back, so all the sides. And then, as much as I don't like using machinery, I will use a random orbit with a 60 grit on it for anything that's got like a tear out. So that's when it's been put through a plane, but the plane goes against the grain and it creates like indents. With roads, you get like potholes, so it's essentially like a pothole in the wood. So I'll sand it as best I can with the 40 to get it as sort of flat as possible, and then just use the 60 just to go over it. If I can't get it up with the 40, I'll probably just use the edge of the sander just to sort of create a dip so that it smooths out just enough that it's easy just to sort of go over it with the burn. Otherwise the pen sort of skips over it, and then you get sort of like it becomes patchy in that area where obviously the tear out's been. But then I'll jump probably to 120, maybe 240, 320, probably then jump all the way up to 600, 800, 1000. And then if it's quite a pale wood like your sycamore or beech maybe, I will probably go up to 1500, 2000. And if I'm feeling up to it, you don't have to go above 1000. Suggest going over 1000. I say probably 800 is completely fine. But yeah, with the paler woods, I tend to enjoy going up to the 3000 because it just creates that sort of absolute canvas effect of like, it's like silky smooth. Like, oh, I can't tell you how silky smooth the wood is at 3000 grit. I'm pretty sure it doesn't really make an effect after about 1500, but you know, it's one of those things. It's a personal thing that I quite like and enjoy, just spending like half an hour to an hour just sanding a nice bit of wood. I won't do it for smaller bits just because it's a bit fiddly, so I'll do it with like a piece like this where it's like 20 by 30, 40, or a little bit bigger than that. And any bigger, well, that sort of size, any bigger than that, you'll be there for a couple hours sanding it. The only reason I made this is just to sort of go over what I do personally, and if anyone had any questions, please feel free. If anyone has any suggestions to improve the way I sand, I'm more than happy to take any advice. Yeah, it's not really much to it. I just thought if I made a video that linked to the blog or the post I put out on my website, that it would be a bit easier to sort of understand if it was sort of like what's he mean by that, or but yeah, it's probably more enjoyable just to read about it. But I thought if I did a video, it can tie in with it. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. It probably wasn't, because it's quite a lot of common sense really, of just like sandpaper, sand the wood. There's not much you can really mess up with sanding as long as you don't over sand with the 40. So the higher the grit, the less it will sand off. So your 40 grit will take loads off, your 60 grit will take quite a bit off, and then the higher and higher you get, absolutely less and less it will take off. Pretty self-explanatory. So yeah, hope this was helpful. Any suggestions for me, please comment below. Any questions, comment below, or message me on one of my platforms, whether that's YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I don't know if you could message on Pinterest, but I'm on there. But yeah, cheers.